All right, 3, 2, 1. Hello, this is Wasey with the Texas Small Business Podcast, the podcast where we know a guy. Today, that guy is Chad Hailey. We're talking to Chad. He's that funny insurance guy, and he handles all sorts of different insurance. So we're going to go through and learn a little bit about him and what he does, as well as him as a person. Kind of the goal of our podcast is to get to know local business people, and this idea actually stemmed from a group that Chad and I attended as a business networking group, and I think it was appropriate for him to be the first guest because he kind of was the glue that got that group together.
I love it.
Yeah, so why don't you go ahead and start off and kind of hit us with your 30-second, 60-second tagline of who you are, and then we'll just kind of go from there.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm Chad Hailey. I am that funny insurance guy, and I say that because, well, one of the things that I love to do is I love to make people laugh. I love to bring joy, and insurance has its moments where it's not joyful, and especially trying to deal with costs and coverages and claims and all the horrible things that go along with insurance these days that become nightmarish. I want to bring joy to all those things and peace into your insurance. So I think insurance is funny, but getting it right is no laughing matter. So that's what I do.
I've always loved that tagline.
Yeah.
Now that's one thing that I guess I've always appreciated about you. I've never been a big personality in a room.
Yeah.
I'm not that guy that's loud and kind of gets people going. That's my brother Scotty, who is also in insurance, actually.
Oh, well.
But yeah, I've always loved that about you, and I love that you bring it to what you're doing with the networking group, with your business. As you get out and get to know people, I think it's a really handy thing, and I'm trying to work on my own personality in that way. But yeah, I've always liked that, and I was curious, were you always kind of a class clown when you were a kid, or was it something that you built later?
Yeah, it's that's such a great question. I think that it brings up good stories in my mind because I grew up and I grew up being, I was the kid that, when I grew up, you had to, if you were talking too much, you had to put your name on the board. And then if you kept talking, you had to put a check by your name and then another check. And so I was the kid at the end of the day that had the most checks. And I don't know if there was I don't think there was an award for that. There should have been, maybe not.
Right. Was it the competitive side of you?
I'm like, I'm going to get the most checks. Well, now my 10-year-old, that's exactly the way he is. And so he's like, in fact, we were talking about that at breakfast this morning. But I hung out with all the class clowns. I hung out with all the guys that were the really funny guys, and I found myself. That's what I like. I loved being funny. I loved being not necessarily the center of attention. I just wanted to be funny. I just wanted to make people laugh. And I started watching comedians when I was young. Probably grade school, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. I started watching comedians, and I would see. There was several comedians. The ones that really caught me were the ones that could do voices, the ones that they could emulate. Like there was one guy that emulated Yogi Bear and Boo Boo, and there was one guy that I heard that made up a voice. And it's Howie Mandel actually made up a voice called Bobby from Bobby's World. It's just like I would hear all these funny voices, and I was like, I love this. I want to be able to do this. But then they would make people laugh too, and so. I took all of that, and it's become part of who I am. So when I started insurance, I knew I needed to brand myself more than anything else. Forget the agency or the brokerage that I work with. I knew I needed to brand me. So the goal was brand yourself, and how do you do that? Well, I can't brand. I was like, I can't brand me without just being me. And so I knew I wanted to bring joy to this whole process, and so I thought, you know what, I'm going to be that funny insurance guy, and that's. I just brought it to the table.
Yeah, as long as I'd been doing, I guess, thinking about the business thing and delving into how to succeed in business and all of this, the branding's always been a big thing. But I hadn't thought about, like we went to Master Networks, and one of their big things is you do business and you refer people with people you like, know, and trust. So you do. Kind of what inspired this podcast is the face-to-face and actually sit down and get to know somebody. And a lot of the time you don't even talk business, but you get to know the person. And that's where, like, you talking about branding yourself and kind of bringing that to what you're doing, I'm starting to really see the value in more. Um, for a long time, I thought business was kind of the face of its own thing. I don't want to be the face of the business, but the more value I see in kind of incorporating the business and yourself hand in hand, um, and and I've really liked watching. I guess I feel like I've progressed a little bit, but I've really liked watching you lead the Weatherford group,
Yeah.
because you are that big personality, can get stuff going and kind of keep everyone involved. But the personalities in the room have really been able to come to the forefront, and I think that humor and all of that helps with all of that. My son's that kid. He wants to be the funny guy. He started watching. He's 10 now, but he started watching comedians. The one that he really likes is Jeff Dunham. He started watching Dunham 2 or 3 years ago, and I mean, sits there. Yeah, he'll watch it hour after hour, and he'll watch the same thing over and over because he wants to pick up how he played into a joke or how he did this voice, and it's really kind of cool to watch. And I was like, he's such an odd kid. And then when we were watching, you did your profile at Master Networks. You were saying how you were that kid. You like to do. I was like, that's where he's at. So I think that's a positive thing for him. After hearing it,
Jeff Dunham is he's one of those characters that I followed for years because I remember when the only puppet in the drawer was Walter.
Yeah.
And he'd pull Walter out, and you big old mean guy, and I loved how he could morph into each character and intertwine each character flawlessly. I think that's brilliant, and so he's one of those that I think that if your son is watching him, he's on the right track.
Yeah, he does. He does so much. Weston's interests are pretty varied. But he goes back to Dunham for a lot of stuff, and the thing that I appreciate about it is I'm not a writer in that I'm published, but I write a lot. I grew up in western South Dakota. We was trapped in snowstorms all the time. We read all the time, so I got to where I like to write. And the thing that I like about Dunham is, like you said, he can take the storylines from one character to the next, and they're all different characters, all different backgrounds, and all connected. And I've always appreciated that about his work is when you go to his show, it's 4 or 5 characters long, but it's all one story. And that's I've always appreciated that, and I love that Weston picked that up. He was probably 7 or 8 when he started watching Dunham, and the reason he keeps going back to him is he loves that he can build those characters together.
Yeah,
and that's I've always liked that about it, but I think that's important for kids to pick that up, and I'm loving. Like I said, I was like, well, that's a little odd for an 8-year-old, but when we heard your presentation, I was like, well, I guess it's not that odd,
it became natural. And hearing the different voices, I think that's one of the things that gets me the most. I'm fascinated by dialects, and I'm fascinated by just cartoon character voices. Being able to hear Scooby-Doo and go, man, somebody actually voiced that, or hear Bugs Bunny and somebody voiced that. I'm showing my age here, by the way. But somebody voiced that, and and there was a guy in a booth with a microphone that made that voice, and I just think that's fascinating, and I've always loved it, and so it's always been something that I've worked on in myself. My wife, it drives her crazy because I have this tendency to, if we're talking with someone who has a different dialect from us, like when we got married in 2003, and we went to Jamaica. We got married in Jamaica and then had our honeymoon. And while we were there, we went on a tour and had a tour guide kind of take us around Jamaica for the day. This guy was the coolest guy on the planet, and he had the coolest accent because it's a Jamaican accent, man. It's so cool, and they talk like this and everything. And all of a sudden, I find myself talking just a little more like this, and my wife keeps elbowing me, and she's like, "You have to stop." and so it's always bugged her. We lived in Japan for a few years, and while we were there, we would teach English to the Japanese, and my thought process was they have difficulty speaking English. So if I help them by slowing down my talk and talk the way they talk, then they understand better. That was just my mindset. So I would naturally just start morphing into how they talk in English. And my wife is like, stop, And so, but I've toned it back. I've learned. I've grown up. But I still find myself going like, put me in a room of, and I'm not being offensive here, but if you put me in a room, I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood. So I grew up with we had lots of black people, lots of Hispanic people, lots of Asian people. So it was really balanced where we grew up, and so. But you put me in a room of brothers and sisters, or you send me to a church that's a little more soulful, and I promise you, I will start being soulful myself. And it's not because I'm trying to be rude; it's because I'm trying to be relatable.
Right.
And I just want to relate. But I love listening to them talk, and I'm like, it's so different from the way I talk. So I want to experience what it's like to talk the way that they talk too. I don't know, it's just weird.
See, I think that's one of the things that makes me feel like I relate to you on different spectrums. Is you're a naturally curious person.
Yeah.
You, when I talk to you or I see you talk to people at the networking group, you're not just asking questions to ask questions. You're just naturally curious, and you genuinely want to know more.
Yeah.
My curiosity generally doesn't stem from uh, like a one-on-one interaction. Like you said, talk to me, I'll get invested in you. But as far as I meet someone, my curiosity is piqued. I'm piqued by places and things and history and all of this stuff. But that was one thing that struck me with you early is you're genuinely curious about people and everything about them. And I really like that. My dad actually spent one spring in Jamaica. So both my parents are horse trainers, but
Okay.
my dad he had the horseshoeing contract on Dances with Wolves.
No way.
So he met the trainers and everything for that. So South Dakota Badlands gets a lot of films. Part of Armageddon was filmed out there because they needed the moon and all of the asteroid surface, and then just smaller films. So Dad ended up he would do animal training on movies occasionally, and there was Steve McAuliffe from out to New Jersey. I don't know where Steve is these days. I haven't talked to him in years, but he had told Dad, if I ever need you, can I call you? And Dad's like, yeah. So South Dakota in March is miserable. It's 30 below and it's brutal. But we always calve cows that time of the year because if you get into up and down temperatures and stuff, calves get sick easier and everything. But anyways, we always calve that time of year. And Steve calls Dad at the start of March, and there's a blizzard hitting. I remember because we drove through a blizzard to drop him off at the airport. But he's like, I need you in Jamaica tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
And Dad's like, I can, I'm calving cows. And the guy's like, my daughter had an incident, and anyways, he needed Dad there, and it was a family thing. And Dad's like, well, I guess I'm going to Jamaica.
Wow.
So I think that was 91. You're gonna know when I get to the movie. But anyway, so Dad he hops on the plane, goes to Jamaica for 6 weeks while we calf cows. I was maybe 7 or 8 at the time.
Gosh.
But it was
You were working
it
hard.
was brutal. But he got to go work in Cool Runnings.
No, that is fun.
They actually filmed a scene. He trained 2 bulls to run and then stop on command because they wanted the bobsled team to run tied together and running away from these bulls, teaching them teamwork. But any animal is going to outrun you over any distance.
Yeah.
So they needed him to stop. So that was Dad's job. So he got to go down there for 6 weeks. They ended up cutting the scene. It's not in the movie. He got to train the dog that's on the car, I guess, and some of that stuff. But yeah, the scene got cut from the movie. He spent 6 weeks down there.
That's cool.
And when he came back, just his stories about because his right hand man was this guy named P Valley from the island there, and he was a local, and Dad almost everything he did with the locals. He had more in common with them than a lot of the movie people, of course, and a lot of the crew was Canadian, and he said the Canadian movie crew was extremely rude. He's like, John Candy, wonderful man.
Yeah.
He's like, but the crew was terrible.
Really?
And he's like, so a lot of the locals helped him with a lot of stuff, and that
They must have been French Canadians.
Yeah, but so when he came back, I remember listening to his stories and listening about how much different their world was.
Yeah.
Because he was like, yeah, you see one thing. He's like, but if you go 10 yards back into the jungle, like the life back there is entirely different.
Yeah.
And so as a kid, I remember being obsessed with that. I was like, man, I really want to know more about that culture. So my curiosity's always been that type of stuff. And I find myself going really OCD overboard on all the stuff that I learn. And I've always thought that was kind of odd about myself, but it just kind of is who I am. And
Yeah.
when I got to that meeting, a lot of people going to the networking meetings. I wouldn't. So the one up there, the group is all great people.
Yeah.
But I've been to them to where people are there and they're shoving a business card at you, and they might ask about you, but they don't really care about you. They're
Right.
just shoving a business card at you. And that group was so much different because everyone was genuinely there to make some connections and learn about people. But I remember you from the first day, like just caught you were excited to be there and you were
Yeah.
excited to learn about people, and I was like, that is kind of a cool curiosity point,
It's and I think God has made us all very different. He's created us all in His own unique way. So we have different desires, we have different interests, we have so many different things. My interest is people. I'm fascinated. I'm like, the most complex creature on earth is a human being.
Right.
And the most frustrating creature on earth is a human being. And the most beautiful creature on earth is a human being. And so when you start thinking about all of that, and then I'm going, okay, and then God gave us this ability to think for ourselves, to create businesses, to buy and sell goods and services, to do all of these incredible things that we get to do on a regular basis. And then we have to figure out how to get along. And we all think differently, and we've all been created differently, and we all have different desires and different things that we want. And I think, it's a beautiful thing that the world goes around the way that it does. Obviously, we can see in today's world that things can go askew and things can get a little crazy and wonky sometimes. Right. But at the end of the day, we're all humans and we all have desires. And like I'm right now, just, here we are in the middle of an election year and it's crazy. And I'm not going into politics here. What I am going into is sociology. I'm fascinated by the way people are responding and reacting, the way that people are communicating with one another, the way that people are trying to utilize their leadership and their influence to influence how people are thinking, how people are going to vote. All of those things are really fascinating.
It is a very fascinating time in society. So I am curious about people, but more from the people watching perspective.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the guy in the middle of the conversation. I like
both.
to be watching the conversation. And yeah, I find that's why the networking group was a major change for me, because it was just a different way of people working, I guess. But we are in a very strange time, from politics to education to social media. Everyone is behaving in various ways to not only control their image, but the image that they want the world to project as well. And it is really interesting to watch. That's I used to go deep dive into politics because I'm a very analytical guy. When I get onto something, I'm diving into.
You're gonna dig it all the way.
And when I was younger, when you're in your 20s, it's really easy to get into that stuff and really feel like you have an opinion. And I used to do that a lot. And then during COVID, it really it hit me that nobody cares. They have their thing. And so I've kind of stepped back since COVID, and I just watch it, and especially this election cycle with, I really thought from a observer point of view, Biden pulling out of the race and Kamala stepping up into that place, it was a very interesting way to see if the person mattered or if the party slash policies mattered because they didn't change anything about what they were pitching. They just
Right.
changed the front of it, and I was like, this will be really interesting. I think it's played out in a very, to me, it was kind of a way that reaffirmed what I thought, but it was really interesting how that went down.
Yeah.
And I was really, um, I mean, obviously, thank God Trump did not get shot and killed. I mean,
Truly.
don't want to see anyone get killed. But I was like, what if he would have pulled out of the race at that point and we would have had two different figureheads with the same race? Like, how much would it have changed? And
Hmm.
the kind of observer part of me kind of wanted Trump to pull out at that point and see how much people would have changed with, because now we're no longer Trump supporters or Biden supporters. We're like, does it actually change or not? And
Yeah.
that's the observer part of me was like, this would be like the craziest election experiment that you could ever pull. We're gonna 2 months before the election or 3 months before the election, we're gonna pull both people and replace them. I
Yeah.
was like, this could have been so wild.
That would have been an interesting. That would have been interesting to see how that would have played out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I keep thinking that if we could just add a third person in there, like regardless, I don't care if they're conservative, liberal. I just want to see how society reacts because I do between the social media and the news cycles and just the instantaneous um, everything that you do is just instantly you have to know it. If you don't know something that happened 3 days ago, people are like, "How do you not know?"
Oh yeah.
And I would really love for our society to make some changes like that, just to keep my viewing a little more interesting. Change up this season a little bit.
No doubt. No doubt.
But yeah, no, that's different. But so with the election season, do y'all see a lot of change on the insurance side, or we have some stuff going on the AC side with refrigerant changes and stuff that
Right.
the election's not really influencing, but are coming down the political pipeline. And I know, like everyone knows about Obamacare and all of this stuff that changed your industry. But is there stuff out there that's happening now that kind of hinges on it, or?
I don't know, and kind of like you, where we'll see changes happen, but it's not necessarily being influenced by an election cycle. That may be part of what is influencing. A lot of what's influencing is simply the economy is in. I feel like it's in flux right now. Everyone is waiting for a ball to drop, but
Yep.
it hasn't dropped yet. And now it's been years since we've expected it to drop. COVID caused a little bit of a drop in the market. Of course, we saw a little bit of a drop in the market about a month or so ago. So we've seen some fluctuations happen, but they've all been minor responses to just what's going on. But then they've corrected fairly quickly, or they've bounced back fairly quickly. So we haven't seen anything that's been a true 1929 market crash, or even a 2008 market crash where we saw a huge dip in what was going on. Policy wise, what we're seeing more than anything else is simply insurance companies doing what insurance companies do. They're bumping rates. There's been some adjustments that have been made to, okay, we're not going to allow these types of policies anymore. We're going to change the rules on these types of policies. So we've seen some changes on short-term policies that are coming down the pipe that are going to they actually go into effect in September. So we're going to see some things that will change a little bit there as far as that's concerned. Whether it's a detriment or a benefit, I think is negligible. I think it's just a change that really the agencies and the brokerages will have to make some adjustments in what they're doing. On the consumer side of things, it really shouldn't change a whole lot. It may change a little bit about what coverages they have access to, but even with the marketplace being what it is and the marketplace continuing to grow, there's still a ton of options out there that are great options for everyone to make sure they're getting coverage. The private insurance is still very much intact and very much an opportunity. I've actually seen some different options. I saw. Typically, I would tell you that a health sharing option may not necessarily be the best way to go, but recently I've seen a couple of health sharing options that are operating more like a PPO insurance option would, which I think is really fascinating because now you've got somebody who's not an insurance company that's operating like one or operating similar to one and giving you the same kind of benefits, which I think is really cool in the health insurance world. So
Yeah, and one thing, one thing that I thought, um, like you, I guess I don't want to speak to your specialty, but you like the group plan. So rather than so like me as my business, I was looking at setting up insurance, and for me to get group coverage, like company coverage,
yeah,
was extremely expensive, and you were able to provide me an option to where my employees, for the most part, haven't taken advantage of it, I guess. But you were able to give me a way for them to go through that and be like a small group plan,
yeah,
and I was really surprised that I've went through insurance and been a business owner and done all of this stuff for years, and I had never like been shown that option, I
yeah,
guess, and I think that more than anything, once I realized that was an option, it's like just kind of go Chad go figure this
yeah.
out. But how often do you run into people that just don't know options that are available, and how hard is it to kind of keep in track with what you do? I worked for a guy in Stephenville named Chris Williams, owns Easter Heat and Air and Easter Laundry and a bunch of this stuff. And
Yeah.
one thing that he said that always stuck with me is in HVAC, there's so much stuff. There's commercial, there's residential, there's high efficiency, low efficiency, refrigeration. There's all this stuff, and we had a project come up that was a little outside of our normal systems, but it was going to be an opportunity to make a lot of money. And I was selling a lot at the time. I was like, I'm going to go bid this project. And he was like, no, you're not. It's not what we do. And I
Yeah.
was like, well, it's under our license. We can do it. And he's like, no, we do what we do and we do it well. Everyone else can do what they do
Yeah.
and do it well. He's like, we're not a jack for all trades. We are a specialty. We are, for them, it's residential. And he's like, we are a residential service provider. This is what we do.
Yeah.
That is not what we do. And with your industry, there's, I mean, just insurance, there's home, there's health, there's all of these things. So how hard is it to inform people on the options that are out there while maintaining kind of a view of what you're doing?
You know, it's a really great question because I think there's so much misinformation that's out there, and just people. I had a mentor tell me at one point in time, people don't know what they don't know, and we tend to be ignorant of most everything else around us except for the things that we know really well, and everything else we just kind of have ignorance to. Ignorance is not a bad thing; we're just not aware. And so my job is to help make people aware of what's out there and what their options are. I sat down with a young man yesterday, and 24 years old, perfectly healthy, and he was like, and I said, what do you know about insurance? And he goes, well, I don't know anything. And I said, well, if you'll oblige me, I said, give me 5 minutes here, and I'll give you a quick education on what insurance is and what you have, what kind of options you have. And so, I just go through a quick education moment just because I want them to understand what their options are. And then of course I want to find out what they're looking for and what their needs are. I talked to another client yesterday, same thing, and I didn't really have anything to offer her. So what she's looking for and what I had to offer didn't really match up. And so I was able to point her in the direction of, instead of doing insurance, she's going to go with a direct care doctor, which is the coolest concept to me today because it's an alternative to insurance, especially if you're somebody who's young and healthy and that's not something that's on top of mind. But for a small fee every month, you can have access to a direct care doctor, a doctor who can come to you, a doctor who can do blood work for you and labs for you.
Yeah, I hadn't I've never heard of that. I guess.
So we have, I live in Brock, America, and so in the small town of Brock, we have a direct care doctor, and I met her, and she's fantastic, but she really only serves our area. And so this girl was up in, she was up in north of Fort Worth, and we were talking and visiting, and I said, let me make a phone call and see if I can find somebody up there in that area. Well, and then I called a friend of mine who is also a direct care doctor, but he has a network of doctors that he works with. And there's several of them. And so he said, I can get you in touch with 2 ladies that are up in that area that should be able to help. And so really cool that I was able to go, even though she's not gonna, she's not buying a product from me, I was able to help her find what she didn't realize she needed and really wanted. Because I knew a guy, and so I love that I'm doing more than just going, hey, how can I get you sold on insurance? It's how can I be a solution to your problem? And that's a lot of what, if you really asked me what I did, Chad, what do you do? Well, I am a solutions provider for small businesses. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that I have access to tools and resources that can help small businesses run more efficiently. They can help you run. They can help you run smoother. They can help get your employees so that they love you so much that they don't ever want to leave. I've got tools and I can help you do all of those things. But really, let's find out what you need more than anything else. If you need to provide your employees with insurance, great, I can help you with that. But if you need business structuring and you need to structure your business in such a way that you've got tax protections in place, so that you're not taking all of your profits and paying taxes to with them, then we can help put that in place too. But if you need training for your employees that goes beyond just here's how you install an AC. No, maybe what you need is you need training with your employees on how to budget their family budget so that they can help their paychecks go further. Or maybe all of your employees are paying way too much for home and auto, and I know a guy that can help save them money on their home and auto. So then you don't have to pay them more. They're just saving $50, $100, $200 a month. I mean, I just stayed with my same guy, but my same guy that I use saved me over $250 a month on my home and auto. And so I'm going, well, I definitely want, like, he's in my group, so anybody that I can refer to him.
In my tool bag.
Yeah.
I love that you said, toolkit to help people. And I feel like you do a really good job of stocking your toolkit with the I know a guy, because a lot of people. But on the employee retention thing, I think that's something that's really important that I know I didn't realize for a long time. The master networks actually kind of allowed me to explore that a little bit, but just having your employees, realizing that you can provide value to your employees beyond the work and the paycheck. And again, Chris with Easter that I work for, him and his wife were phenomenal about that. They the thing that they did that really let me know they were different, I guess, was when they took over. It was September, October-ish, and at the end of the year, they didn't give us a Christmas bonus in cash. They booked a week in, I believe it was in Las Vegas that year. There's a conference that does HVAC equipment and all of this, but they also asked, would you like to go to a show or whatever, but they paid for an experience. And so you went somewhere, and I asked Chris about that, and he's like, well, really, he's like, it cost me whatever, a couple $1,000 either way, as if I give you cash today, it'll be blown next week, and you will get nothing out of it.
Yeah.
He's like, you go out there for a week, you're gaining information that's going to help me with my business, and then on top of that, he goes, you get an experience that you wouldn't have spent that money on yourself to go do that, so you'll get the experience. And I was like, this is somewhat different, and I thought they were really good about doing that. And I got caught up, I know, in the early years of business of, man, you're trying to find a way to make it work, and you're just day to day to day, you're just in the grind, and it's hard to get there. And I really, this last spring, fall, made myself step back and be like, I need to figure something different out. This isn't working. And that's where I started exploring some of this different stuff. And the Master Networks really reminded me that I was missing out on the people that I had working for me and keeping their interest in mind. And one thing with I've got a really good crew put together over the last 6 months, and one thing I kind of ask as you get to know them, you figure out where their values lie in different stuff, and kind of ask, what can we be doing to make your life easier at home? Like, we're obviously doing everything we can to get you home on time and not have you stressed when you get home. But what can we do? And a lot of it is simple stuff like budgeting, like healthcare, like,
Yeah.
hey, my kid's got school stuff, can we find a way to schedule around this? And, uh, and I think keeping that dialogue open is really important for employers to retain employees. And honestly, I don't know that I would have got back on that track without having the toolkit of the business networking and the people that I've met there. And then being able to be like, I've got an insurance guy that's going to help us with the insurance. I've got an insurance guy that if you're struggling with your home and auto, I've got a guy I can call, and kind of expanding out that network in your toolkit for the employees. And I guess I really like that you reference it as a toolkit. I get told I'm bad about compartmentalizing with people.
Yeah.
Like, everyone's got their role and their everything, and I've always been that way in my life. But I do think that as you go to help businesses, like, I like that you reference it as a toolkit, because people really are your best tools to what's the mistake one that they're always talking about? Oh, a wise man learns from his mistakes, or something.
Oh, yeah. Something like,
wise man learns from his own mistakes, and someone, I don't know how that goes. But
something like successful people learn from other people's mistakes.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, as I've gotten to know people, know you and people from the group, it's everyone's hit all of these experiences, and maybe they haven't had all the experiences that I've had as a business owner, but somebody's hit something similar.
Right.
And you can roll past that. And the idea of keeping a toolkit of those experiences by meeting more people and growing out was something that really struck me. And that's where I'm far enough away from the group in Weatherford where it's like, man, I can't keep doing that. And I was like, what if I start a podcast and I can just do the one-on-ones?
There you go.
That's
I love that.
That's why I called you first, because I was like, this is really where I saw the values. Chad is a people person, actually curious about them and their lives, and he has a huge toolkit of what he can use and how he can help people.
Yeah.
And like, you don't let it overrun your life, your personal life, your family. You've got, is it 3 sons? Is that correct?
3 sons, yeah.
Yeah, and you've got your 3 sons and your wife, and you do your vacations together, and you've got a very solid family life. You've got a religious background. I guess I won't delve too much into making assumptions, but you seem to be a religious person, and you've lived a really interesting life. You were band growing up.
Yeah, and I was in a rock band. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't picture you at a rock band today. But but like I just genuinely found that interesting. But the rock band thing is actually, Weston's big into punk rock.
Oh, okay.
Really big into punk rock.
So who are some of his favorite bands these days?
Blink's his
Blink
favorite.
is okay. Okay.
He listens to mostly 90s stuff. A lot of bowling. We went to Bowling Pursuit this summer.
Oh, yeah, I remember you telling me that.
Green Day. He's big into that. He got started on a bunch that I don't even know. It was really weird. So I've got a customer who runs a vet clinic, equine health, I guess.
Okay.
And we had done some work on her house and her vet clinic, and her husband was always home. And I try not to make assumptions about people, but I'm like, dude is just living off the sugar bubble. But anyways, we go out there on a Saturday, and we had been to Blink, I think, the week before. So
okay.
Weston, he he buys adult small because you can't find kids shirts at
I
their
know.
shows.
I know.
So he's got this baggy Blink 182 shirt on. The guy comes out, and I'm working on the AC, and he's like, "Hey, you like those guys?" Weston's like, "Yeah, we went to the show, and it's going off." And this guy's like, "Yeah, I actually know them." And he's like, "You know them?" And it turns out this guy played in punk rock bands in California back in the 90s.
Nice.
And then he was in a couple of movies, like small role type stuff. He's
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, I basically live off royalties of my music and movies, and then I have, my online stuff I do." He's like, "But that's what I did." And so him and Weston sat there, and Weston has a cell phone because it helps his mom and I with communication.
Sure.
And so they're on Weston's phone, and they're scrolling through YouTube, and this guy is deep diving on early 90s punk rock.
I love it. That's
and
awesome.
Weston just, he's taking notes on bands, and so, now he goes deep diving a lot more than even, I grew up in the 90s, and I don't know how.
I'm like, I knew Green Day, I knew Blink, and like Sum 41, I think came out right at the turn of the century, and so there were great bands out there. I'm a child of the '90s. I think '90s was the pinnacle of music. Country music was at its best.
And
rock
everyone
music.
listened to everything.
Yeah,
because there was so much good rap, there was so much good rock, so much good country, and I don't know of anyone that grew up in our area that doesn't listen to a variety. But maybe when it comes to punk rock or whatever, we don't deep dive as far.
Oh yeah,
because we have all of these surface bands, so where everything was going on at the same time. We had George Strait at the same time as Blink and Tupac.
Right.
It was just but yeah, Wes is really big into that. But I like that guy. I would never have pictured, and he was a punk rock. I can't remember guitar player. Or drums, but him and Weston really they sat there. I think I was there 45 minutes. And almost the whole time they're just YouTubing all
awesome.
of this.
I love it.
So Weston watches concerts and Ticketmaster and stuff. And when one comes up, he'll be like, "Hey, we need to hit it." So we try to hit one a year, and that's we did Bowling for Soup this year. We did Blink last year. He wants to try to get me to go to Green Day this fall. I think
that would be fun.
But we've already hit our one for the year, and I'm
well, they're expensive. I mean, oh my gosh, the tickets these days are outrageous.
Terribly, the Bowling for Soup show was actually really affordable. It was
and they were regional. They did they had the one song that had some national acclaim to it.
Well, yeah, they had 1985 and Almost. They had about 4 that hit nationally.
Yeah,
but I didn't in my mind. I didn't picture them being old, And they were on their third year.
We opened for them back in the day. So,
did you?
Yeah.
Nice.
So we opened. They were
on their 30-year tour.
We were playing. We played with them at the Aardvark over in Fort Worth. That was over off Berry Street.
Awesome.
Which is funny enough. That's where I met my wife too. Was at the Aardvark in Fort Worth. That place is great. We love the Aardvark. It's not there anymore, which is sad. But yeah, growing up. That the '90s was so much fun for music. Because like you were saying, and then here I was, there was obviously we had the big 3. You have the rap, your rock, and your country. But I grew up playing trumpet, so I'm in high school and college in the '90s playing trumpet, and so there's this whole other world that I love too, this jazz and this classical world. So I fell in love with musicals. My marching band, my junior year in high school, we marched to the music of Dances with the Wolves. You mentioned that movie earlier. So I was really familiar because we watched that movie a million times, really trying to get the emotion of the movie onto the field as we marched. It's really cool.
That soundtrack was...
It was outstanding. Yeah, it was a really great
well
soundtrack.
done.
And so, but I found myself going, okay, I appreciated the rap, but I'd kind of grown out of that season. That just wasn't my jam anymore. But the country and the rock I loved. And then I love jazz too. And so I was looking for something that was how do you find, where's that band that does this rockabilly jazz type thing? And then there was this season where, punk turned into ska. and ska was like, there was like this morph of ska and rockabilly. So you'd have these rockabilly bands that had horn sections in them. Brian Setzer did it the best. I loved him. Brian Setzer from the Stray Cats. He had his own orchestra, and so he was fantastic at it. But then I discovered in '95, I discovered a band called Blues Traveler. I had a friend introduce me to Blues Traveler, and I was like, oh my gosh, these guys are amazing, because there was this harmonica player who was out of this world. Well, then I remember watching MTV when they still showed videos on MTV. And one Friday night, I remember hearing that harmonica again and knowing, okay, that's the Blues Traveler guy, because no one else plays harmonica that way. And then turned it on, and it was the Dave Matthews Band. And so then I was a little confused, and I was like, wait a minute, who's the Dave Matthews Band? Like, who are these guys? And then I start digging into who they are, and I fell in love. I was like, okay, this is the best band ever. They've got, the drummer is unbelievable. The front man plays acoustic guitar. It's a mixed band. So there's 3 black guys in the band,
that's kind of a blended genre that gets forgotten about.
Oh.
Dave Matthews was huge. Like, the early Matchbox 20 stuff, like, people recognize it when they hear it, but that, like, I don't know, we didn't, being in South Dakota, we had, like, 3 radio stations. We had the reservation station, which played a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And then you had a station that played, like, 80s, 90s, and 70s, 60s. And then you had country.
Yeah.
And that was, so the station that played kind of everything. There was a rock station that we were 100 miles out of Black Hills. if you got on the road to go into school, just before you got to school, you could hit up on this hill and you'd catch the rock station. but that whole, like, they didn't even define it as a genre, so I'm not sure what it was, but that 70s, 80s, 90s station, all of that stuff was playing, and it's not really rock, it's not really pop, and that's something that, like, I'll bet you my kids never heard of Dave Matthews.
Well, and I loved the creativity of it. It sounded like you were listening to Miles Davis or John Coltrane, where it was just sort of weird, but it had the pop elements to it, and it had the rock elements to it. So they're playing typical rock chord progressions, pop chord progressions, but they're doing it and they're jamming it out, and they're making a song last 6 and 7 and 8 minutes, and they're just having fun with it. And I was like, oh, I love this. It was so amazing to me. And so I find myself deep diving on all of that stuff. Like, when I heard Dave Matthews, I went and bought an acoustic guitar and was like, I got to teach myself how to play acoustic guitar, because I've never heard it played like this, and it's awesome. And then, of course, shortly thereafter, I'm a music major. I'm playing trumpet in college, and I get a call from a buddy of mine, and he says, hey, we just lost our bass player in our band. And I was like, okay. And they knew I was a music major, so I was like, well, all right, I'll ask around the music department and see if I can maybe help you find somebody. And they were like, no, we want you to be our bass player. And I was like, wait a minute. I play trumpet. I don't even know how to play bass. Like, I barely just learned how to started playing acoustic guitar. And they were like, you'll figure it out. Go get a bass. And come on, we've got rehearsal on Tuesday. Come on, let's go. And I'm going, what? I don't know what to do with that. And so I literally did. I went down to Guitar Center and bought the cheapest bass I could find. And didn't even, I had, my roommate at the time had an electric guitar amp that just sat there. And so I asked him, I was like, hey, can I use that? Like, would you mind? So I'm literally plugging my bass guitar into an electric guitar amp. And, which, if you know anything about that, those two don't mix real well. It's not a real good plan. And so, but that was what I had. So that was where I started and started playing rock and roll with these guys. And it was, we were weird, because the front man, his favorite band was Radiohead. And so, and then he loved Tool. And so they were like, really technical. A little technical, a little harder, a little unusual and weird. The drummer was he loved all this technical jazz. And then he loved, not Pink Floyd, Rush.
So Rush was,
and
Canadian. That's one of those that gets forgotten about.
Those guys were for a 3-piece band. Those guys were unbelievable. And then and so it was just the three of us at the when we started, and here I come, and I love Dave Matthews and Counting Crows and Train, and and all these bands, and so we mixed all of that together, and we produced this sound that was like, it was like I loved when Sting finally left the Police and decided to just be Sting. He was so big at that point that the record companies were like, we don't really know how to define you, so you just do whatever you want to do. And so you'd listen to his records, and on his records, you'd hear pop, you'd hear a rock track, you'd hear a country track, and you're like, why am I hearing a country track on a Sting album? But it made sense, and he made it work. And so that was kind of, we were like, you know what, we're just going to be us. So we had some hard rock, we had some funk, we had some blues, we had some pop, we had, we were kind of all over the place, but we weren't afraid to explore and just try something different. And we do it at live shows, like we just jam out and had a great time. It's so much fun.
See, and that's something in that story that I think is worth commenting on is how many opportunities by people are missed because they're not willing to step out of. So you had never played bass, and they're like, "Hey, you're going to play bass," and you're like, "Well, I guess I'll figure it out."
Yeah.
And so much of my life, like predicting me in the AC business would have been wild. I grew up cowboying to two horse trainer parents that rodeoed. Did mainly cowboy stuff all the way into college. Went to college for computers, and somehow I ended up here. But
I went to college for computers too.
I had one of those things where I'd built this database for a company, and the computer thing wasn't working out. I didn't like being in an office, but I needed to train someone to run my system, and there was a bunch of construction companies, but one of them was AC. So while this guy trained to run my system, I was like, hey, I'll jump in with the service tech.
Oh, there you go.
And it turned out I picked it up fairly quick. And it's one of those things, like, I could have sat in the office and done nothing, but the service tech needed help one day. And I was like, hey, on the way I grew up on a farm and a ranch, especially middle of nowhere, something breaks down, you have to be a mechanic.
Right.
Someone gets hurt, you got to be a medic. Fire starts, you got to be a firefighter. Like, you can't, like, this stuff isn't, everyone does everything, and no one's scared to jump into a new realm. And
it's not like being in the Metroplex where you've got unlimited resources at your fingertips. So you have to be the resource.
I feel like there's a lot of this generation that's being handicapped, and not really to a fault of their own, but everything is so accessible.
Right.
To where there's a guy for that, there's a guy for this.
Yeah.
And they don't learn to step out of their comfort zone and do something wild. I've never done the podcast thing today. I literally set up these mics and sound stuff. I ran around with some music guys like 15 years ago. I had Mike Stanley try to show me how to run a soundboard once, and I failed miserably. but like most of this stuff I've never worked with before, but I had it in my mind, and I was like, we're going to do it. And
I love it.
This week didn't work out perfect, but I was like, we're going to do it. And I think there's so much of that to where, like, you see that in what you're doing, like your story, your career story. Like, you haven't always been insurance.
No.
You kind of graduate from one thing to the next, and just being able to be the type of person to step out there and do something different is really valuable, I think. And I think we're losing it, and part of it is our fault as parents and everything else. You get to where you really want to control what your kids are doing so that they succeed.
Yeah.
And I guess I see that whole, hey, let's pick up a bass and go start a band thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's something that I think is valuable. Maybe not at the time. Maybe it's not great at the time, but it builds something in people to where they can go on later and do stuff. And so I really like that about that story I mean, we had an interest in it, but I didn't plan on playing in a band, and then they're like, hey, play this instrument you've never played.
Right.
Like, I think that's really cool.
Well, it lends itself to, number one, I know something that my dad taught me, and when he passed in 2020, and when he passed, I really reflected on who he was and what he passed on. What is my dad's legacy? And it came down to four things. One of those things, and one of the first things that really hit me about my dad and that I remembered about him was my dad brought excellence to everything he did. And because he did, he never went without. Like our family was never without. It was my dad and my mom moved to Texas all on their own from Louisiana. Didn't have any support system here. No, I mean, had a couple of friends, but nothing else, and four kids. And so they figured it out, we kind of grew up lower middle class, and then we graduated from lower middle class to mid to upper middle class just because my dad was excellent at what he did. And that was one of the things that I took with me was that just be excellent at whatever you're doing. And it doesn't matter what you do. My dad hung wallpaper. That was what he did. But he was excellent at it. And because he could charge more than anyone else. And he was the only guy in town that could do it as well as he did it. Like, I would imagine if you went into some of those houses in the 80s that he hung wallpaper in, if the wallpaper's still there today, not one corner is peeling.
See, and that's I think it's okay to try and fail.
Sure.
I think it's terrible to fail to try. Like that's
100%.
That's one of those things. Like, yeah, but what if I'm not good at it? So like, well, then you find out you suck at something.
100%.
Move on to something else. But I think anything that you do, whether you're bad at it or not, you should expect yourself to keep getting better and expect yourself to try and move forward. And that's a lot of the older generation. They, if nothing else, they cared about what they were doing to the extent I'm going to do it better just so that I know I'm doing the best job I can.
Right.
I actually, just before I moved to Texas, I had been working AC or HVAC up there, and my foreman up there actually advised me to find a different career path. We had been working commercial, and I was picking it up, and I thought I was picking it up all right, but it wasn't at the speed that he would have liked, and there were some things that he didn't like about how I was doing things, I guess. And yeah, I had told him I was moving to Texas, and he's like, well, it's kind of good. He's like, because we were hitting a point where I was going to have to make a decision. He's like, I like you. I don't want to have to fire you.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it upset me. And I was like, I know that I've been doing this, but when I made the move to Texas, I called the guy that owned Easter at the time, was Matt Harper. I called Matt on the phone, like I just looked AC company in Stephenville.
Yeah.
I had a brother in Stephenville. I knew I was moving here. And talked to Matt, got a job. And I didn't know anymore when I got to Texas and South Dakota. But I had this drive, this 18-hour drive down here. And I was like, I know I'm never having that conversation again.
Yeah.
Like, I'm either figuring this out or I'm doing something else. And I did progress really quickly through my career once I got here. And I think a lot of that was just when I was there and working, maybe not consciously, but I had kind of been, well, that's just my job.
Right.
And having that talk with him as I was leaving, like, I can't remember the guy's name. But I'll never forget that conversation, because leaving there, I was like, I will never have that conversation again, because I'm either going to do my best and then know that I'm doing my best and get better at something, or I won't do it.
Yeah.
And that's I've stepped away from stuff over the years. The refrigeration thing, I can do refrigeration stuff. I can set up a walk-in. I'm not great at it.
Yeah.
And I don't have the time to learn to be great at it. And I'm doing a Mexican restaurant in Stephenville right now, the HVAC part. And when we were bidding it, they're like, so the kitchen stuff. I'm like, that ain't me.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we'd like someone who'll bid both. And I was like, well, then you're going to have to find someone who'll bid both, but that ain't me.
Yeah.
And the guy that was taking the bids, the general contractor, it set him off a little bit. Like, he's like, well, just find someone and bid them as a sub. I was like, no, that isn't me. That's not what I do.
Right.
The guy funding the project was at that meeting, and he's like, why won't you bid it? And I was like, because I can do it, but I'm not good at it. It's not what we do. You need someone that's what they do.
Yeah.
And I got the job. and I think it's really important to be able to try new stuff and be like, I'm going to jump in and do base. And if you're not good at it, or you're not interested enough to do your best at it, then step away, find something else, and and be like, I tried it, I failed. Like failure's not a bad thing, and it gets such a bad connotation these days.
We have this. We have this. I think there's a mentality in business or in entrepreneurship to focus on, if you can get stronger in your weaknesses, you'll be stronger overall. But the truth of the matter is that you need to be strongest in your strengths,
Yeah.
and focus on what you're strong at. And when you can do that, there's an integrity that shows when you say, look, this is my strength, that is not my strength, and I'm going to work in my strength. And I'll give you the best I got, and you're going to get what you want if you'll let me work in my strength. If you try to get me to work outside it, if somebody came along and said, Chad, I need you to play electric guitar on, in the band. Well, I'd go, well, I'm not that guy. Like, I'm not going to help you there because that's not my strength. My strength is I can lay down the low end, I can play bass guitar for you like nobody's business, and I can strum acoustic and sing if you need me to. But I'm not going to play the electric because that's not my thing. And it's okay. I think that we tend to think that we're losing an opportunity, but you just proved that that's not true because you said, no, look, that's not my thing, and you still ended up getting the contract. So.
And I actually think I got the contract because I was willing to admit it wasn't my thing.
Right.
I think that there's a lot of people out there that are just seeking honesty.
Yeah.
And that's like, you're a genuine person. When you meet people, you're genuinely curious about them. You genuinely want to know how you can make their lives better.
Yeah.
And people see that because it's the social media stuff today, Facebook and everything. A lot of people have an appearance that they want to keep up. Even if they're not that person, it's really important that if they're doing anything that it adds to this persona. And I think there's a lot of people that value actually getting to the root of who someone is and seeing who someone is, and someone that's comfortable enough to say, that's not what I do. I'm bad at that. You don't want me doing that.
Right.
I think that people see that and they're like, well, what do you do? Because if you're willing to tell me you suck at something, you must be really good at something.
Yeah, that's right.
And I do think that's one of those things that, like I said, is you as a genuine person, you really, when you walk up and you talk to someone, like they genuinely know, hey, this guy wants to get to know me. This guy wants to help me.
Yeah.
But we're hitting on an hour already.
Wow.
So I guess I had pictured it as a 1 hour thing. Maybe have you back for a short segment. I've got an idea to do some short segments during the week.
Yeah.
But for now, I think we're going to call this good for today.
That's great.
Give us another brief overview of what you do and where people can reach you, and if nothing else, the location of one of your networking meetings where they can come meet you in person.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, yeah, again, I'm Chad Hailey, that funny insurance guy, and you can find me on the socials. I'm on all of them. I'm not active on all of them, but I'm on all of them. It's just at that funny insurance guy. So you can find me Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm all over. Working on YouTube, but I haven't gotten there yet. And not on LinkedIn. Well, I think I'm on LinkedIn, but I think I'm on LinkedIn just as Chad Hailey. Networking. I have groups all over Tarrant County, Parker County, and we're stretching beyond as we can. The group that I lead is Thursday mornings in Weatherford at the OS State Golf Course at 10 a.m. I have two groups that meet in Fort Worth. One that's closer to downtown at Ensemble Co-working. They meet 8:15 a.m. on Tuesday mornings, and then I have another group that meets on Tuesday mornings at 10 a.m. At Rockfish, which I don't remember the address of at Rockfish, but it's on Camp Bowie. You can't miss it. If you do a Google search for it, you'll find it. That's where I'm at right now, and really and truly, I'm looking to help small businesses. That's what I do, and that's what I want to be able to do. And like I said before, my goal is to figure out how can I help you become a stronger small business owner. How can I help your business to become stronger? Because what we know is that the backbone of this country is and always will be small business. And so if we are doing everything that we can do to strengthen those small businesses, then that's what I want to be able to do. And I've got, like I said, I have resources and tools. And by tools, I mean I have people and connections that can help you strengthen your business and make it as strong as you want to. So there you go.
Well, I appreciate you coming onto the podcast and introducing everyone to the guy that knows the guy.
There you go.
You kind of epitomize our slogan here. You are the guy that knows the guy.
I love it.
But thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I thought it went pretty well. I
Yeah.
guess we'll see how it sounds when we put it out.
There you go.
All right. Thanks, Chad.
Thanks.